let's let Judy finish what she's playing.
Pause it.
Let's see.
It's blinking.
Okay, it's blinking, so that means it's recording. This past Tuesday, in Bible study, we looked at Richard Elliott Friedman's book on the Exodus. I hope you enjoyed it, Ollie. Good. And, well, let's just put it this way. How many of you have seen the Ten Commandments? Charlton Heston, Ann Baxter, dripping estrogen off all the off all the sets. Right, everybody looking too clean except in the actual mud pit scenes. Okay. How many of you have seen The Prince of Egypt? The animated one. I'm the only one? Huh. Well, we're going to have to remedy that. Actually, the Prince of Egypt is a better telling of the story. But and you don't have the cheesy dialogue that has made the other so beloved and referred to sometimes as a camp classic as much as a special effects classic. And this morning we are going to be looking at one of my least favorite books in the Bible, Numbers. The Hebrew title is Bimidbar. Bimidbar is Hebrew for in the wilderness. And the thing, I used to think that Ecclesiastes was my least favorite. Yeah, it's Numbers. Numbers has been described as a book where God gets mad at Moses. God loses his temper with Moses. Moses loses his temper with God. They both lose their temper with the Israelites. The Israelites lose their temper with the other two. I mean, it is a very protracted and difficult book. I mean, it's worse than trying to read through the law codes in Leviticus, which I don't recommend unless you are really gung-ho. And the reason that it is so difficult is the wilderness is not a comfortable place. It's hot. There's not enough food. Nobody except Moses and God seem to know where they're going. And both of them are not as forthcoming as everybody else wishes they were. I mean, it's just a difficult situation. They have left the life they knew, the slavery in Egypt, all right? I mean, it was bad, but at least they knew what it was. They had parameters. They knew, you do this, that, and the other thing, and the Egyptians will leave you alone most of the rest of the time. Although most of the rest of the time is not the majority of the time you have in the day. So they get out of Egypt, they get to the Red Sea, or the Sea of Reeds, or the furthermost sea. And the Egyptians, of course, chase them because Pharaoh has changed his mind about letting them go yet again. And their cry is, why did you mess with us? Why didn't you just leave us alone? We would still be in Egypt. We knew what we were facing. And of course, God's response is to tell Moses, stretch out your staff, the waters part, they go through, the Egyptians are held back from following, until almost all of the Israelites are through on the other side, or the Levites, because Friedman's theory is that the Levites were the only ones who were ever in Egypt, because they're the only ones with Egyptian names, and they're the only ones who have Egyptian-style artifacts with them, and that everybody else was already in Canaan, which does actually fit the archaeology better. But anyway, the people get through almost all the way through the sea. The barrier standing between them lifts. The Pharaoh's chariots plunge in. Then the waters come crashing down. I mean, it is still a standard special effect. Yeah, and it's old. It is like 65 years old now. So I mean, it was that good, especially after they transferred everything to Blu-ray and got rid of all the matte lines. So you don't see that anymore. But it's probably less than a month, and the Israelites start complaining again about there's no food. And they keep it up. Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. And they finally get to a point in chapter 13 of Numbers where God tells Moses, pick one spy from each of the tribes of Israel, send them up to the land to scout it out, to see what we're getting into. And so Moses chooses 12. And they're gone an appropriate amount of time. I think it's something like 6 weeks, which might be that it's the ever-present 40 days. And they come back, and their initial report is, this is a wonderful land. I mean, they are literally carrying a bunch of grapes that has to be stuck on a pole between two of them because there are so many grapes in this bunch. And it's very fertile, it's wonderful, and at that point everybody is ready to go forward, and then they let the other shoe drop. This is at verse 27, if you have a Bible with you. This is what they told him. We came to the land, this is what the spies, told Moses. We came to the land you sent us to. It does indeed flow with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. However, there's always a but, isn't there? The people who inhabit the country are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the Anakim there. The Anakim were apparently a branch of the Nephilim. In the King James Version, that was translated as giants. So, I mean, these are big bad dudes. Amalekites dwell in the Negev region, that's down in the southern desert. Hittites, Jebusites, and Amorites inhabit the hill country, and Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the Jordan. Okay, so there's a catch. It's not going to be easy to get there, and it's not going to be easy to settle there. Caleb hushed the people before Moses and said, "Let us by all means go up, and we shall gain possession of it, for we shall surely overcome it." But the men who had gone up with him said, "We cannot attack that people. It is stronger than we." Thus they spread calumnies among the Israelites about the land they had scouted, saying, The country that we traversed and scouted is one that devours its settlers. All the people that we saw in it are men of great size. We saw the Nephilim there, okay? Giants again. I mean, remember Goliath? The Anakim are part of the Nephilim, and we looked like grasshoppers to ourselves, and so we must have looked to them. And of course, if you actually grew up reading the Bible, you know what happened next. Caleb and his fellow spy Joshua are all for pressing ahead. You know, the time may not come again. You know, remember your Bob Dylan. You know, the times they are changing. The time may not come again. You know, we need to go forward. I mean, it's sort of like, if you've ever seen the musical 1776, which is oddly entertaining, even though it slanders North Carolinians, South Carolinians, Edmund Rutledge from South Carolina, John Dickinson, and the Quakers of the Middle Colonies, you know, who were less than enthusiastic about going to war, the last bunch. You know, there are historical problems with that film, but they had, they had the right idea about making the founding fathers human beings, and recognizable. Jefferson has trouble getting started writing the Declaration of Independence because he's lonely for his young wife. Well, his young wife never came up to Philadelphia because she just had a miscarriage. But, the point remains. And it's the only time that, congressional debates have ever managed to gain some degree of entertainment value. In the wilderness, Stephen Hopkins, who is the delegate from Rhode Island, or one of the delegates from Rhode Island, says that that Americans were withering on the vine for the lack of independence. They were rotting on the vines. The time had come. They had to go ahead and do something. Caleb and Joshua, the same thing. The time is here. We go now. We can do this. The other 10 are not so sure. And it's the other 10 who shout the loudest and carry the day. And there was a very telling remark. I don't know if you noticed, there's a very telling remark in what the other spies said. When we saw these people in this land you sent us to, we looked like grasshoppers in our own eyes. And we surely looked like them to us. And it is presented as a punishment, and that's true enough, that they have to wander in the wilderness until just about all of the adults have died. So they basically have to stay there the rest of the generation. And why do you think that was? It was because in their own minds they were still slaves. And it is very difficult the proverb. The old proverb, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Well, you can, but it is a lot harder than trying to teach a puppy. And when you think about it, in our meeting here, we have people who were born in the 40s. We have people who were born in the 60s. We have people who've been born since 1980, and we have a couple of people who've been born since 2000. Yeah. So we have a lot of different generations for such a small group of people. And newsflash, the world looks different to every one of those generations. The oldest among us grew up with civil rights being the big issue. My group, it was more gender rights. And of course, tokenism. In fact, in my 9th grade English class, my 9th grade year, especially in my English class, I liked the teacher. And I would refer to myself as the token Quaker until it was pointed out to me that might be misheard for another word. And those who are old enough know what I'm talking about, and those who are not old enough don't need to know it. Because I was basically the only Quaker in that class. So, and then, after gender equality, it is gender identity equality, and all sorts of things. And those of us who are older can sometimes be left scratching our heads. We just have to remember that the world looks different if you grew up in a different place at a different time. And what does all this have to do with us? Guess where we are, folks? In the middle of the wilderness. And most of us probably don't like it that much. There are things about it, we like not having to manage 3 buildings or whatever. We like being freed from some of our former obligations as landlords. But we don't like the fact, some of us don't like the fact that we are no longer one of the biggest houses of worship in Winston-Salem. Or, Willie Fry isn't our pastor anymore, Judith isn't our pastor anymore, or whoever. The world moves on. So what we have to do in this time of transition is pay attention to the way we see ourselves. We are not as grasshoppers in the face of our challenges. We are grown-ups, almost all of us. Some of us are very grown up indeed. That's one of the advantages that Quakerism can have over different forms of worship. You can learn to see things as they are. Not necessarily as you think they ought to be. So, what is our challenge? What are the challenges we have right now? What is our vision? There's a reason that both of the hymns that I picked for today mention vision. The Israelites of old are depicted as having either an angel of the Lord going before them, smoothing the way, or a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night, which might simply mean that there was an erupting volcano in Midian that they made a beeline for, because Moses knew where to go, since he apparently had been there before. What is our vision? What are we looking at? What are we holding in our minds and in our hearts as we move forward? And that's the question I leave with us this morning, Mary. Topple.